watching the History Fella channel. In this video we're looking at when the buffalo roamed. Few animals represent the Old West better than the mighty buffalo. It's even mentioned in cowboy folk song Home on the Range. Like the rattlesnake, the marshal's badge and the gunslinger, it's a quintessential image of the Old West. But the buffalo were almost wiped out during the latter half of the 19th century. For hunters it was a business, for many it was a sport. For the US Army it was a deliberate tactic to starve the natives into submission. Their skins and meat were valuable commodities. Their bones could be used as knife handles or ground to make fertilizer. They were also easily hunted, having no defense against human predators. When one buffalo was shot, others gathered around it. Hunters could make short work of entire herds with repeating rifles like the 1873 Winchester and the muzzle-loading Sharps. Sport hunters didn't kill them for their meat, skins or bones. They simply shot them in huge numbers for entertainment, leaving their carcasses wherever they were found. Friction between hunters and natives grew as the buffalo dwindled, often leading to violence. Natives, especially the fierce Comanche and Cheyenne tribes, raided hunting camps to avenge the extermination of the buffalo. Hunters in turn avenged the raiders with reprisals of their own, as did the US Army. The Buffalo Hunters' War of 1877 was particularly violent, with dozens killed or injured. While hunters like Buffalo Bill Cody viewed them as a commodity, many travelling west shot them simply for fun. They were easy targets, and it livened up long, dull train journeys when trains stopped and passengers broke out their rifles. Railroad hunts were known as raised hunting, with passengers climbing on top of carriages to get an easier shot. Both commercial and sport hunting were not only tolerated by the authorities, but actively encouraged. Less interested in money and sport, the federal government had a much darker motive for wanting buffaloes to be exterminated. For Native Americans, the destruction of the buffalo equated to destroying their way of life. Westward expansion had met with hostility from many Native Americans. Their way of life was threatened, and they knew it, many opting to resist by any means available. The US government, on the other hand, were absolutely determined to crush the dissent, and weren't at all fussy about how they did it. Treaties were routinely signed and routinely broken. When natives retaliated, they faced swift, brutal reprisals. As Sioux leader Sitting Bull put it, "Only 7 years ago we made a treaty by which we were assured that the buffalo country should be left to us forever. Now they threaten to take that also." One way was forcing them to give up their nomadic hunter-gathering lifestyle, confining them to reservations. Reservations belonged to the federal government, usually land deemed worthless, and in the eyes of many, fit only for the natives. They were often situated hundreds of miles from buffalo hunting grounds to discourage natives from pursuing their traditional ways. The problem in such a vast country was forcing them into reservations and actually keeping them there. Once on a reservation, they would be dependent on food supplies delivered by the government, supplies that could be suspended or cut entirely as a form of collective punishment. Positioning reservations far from buffalo was intended to curb their nomadic existence, but often had the opposite effect. Many reservation Indians, especially among the Cheyenne and Sioux, still left to hunt buffalo, refusing to abandon their traditional way of life. The government knew enough about them to understand that nomadic existence depends on readily available food. Buffalo, for instance, the fewer buffalo there were, the harder it was for them to live outside the reservations. In effect, the buffalo hunting was a weapon of war, encouraged to starve the Native Americans into submission. It was collective punishment of all natives for resistance, mounted only by some. A dirty tactic that today would be considered a war crime, but effective nonetheless. It wasn't a new idea either. One of its principal architects was General William Tecumseh Sherman, whose army ravaged the Confederacy during the Civil War. Sherman's march had been a massive punitive expedition, with the express intent of destroying anything and everything useful to the Confederate war effort. It also destroyed a great deal that wasn't. Railroads were ripped up, food supplies burned, livestock shot, and left to rot in the wake of Sherman's army. Almost all of Atlanta was burnt to the ground. If it worked against the Confederacy, Sherman reasoned, it should be equally effective against the Native Americans. And it was. General Winfield Scott Hancock made it very clear to the tribes, you know well that the game is getting scarce, and that you must soon have to have some other means of living. You should therefore cultivate the friendship of the white man, so that when the game is all gone, they may take care of you if necessary. As a tactic, it was successful. Environmentally, it was a disaster. There had once been millions of buffalo roaming the plains, and many thousands of natives peaceably following them. By the end of the 19th century, buffalo numbered mere hundreds. As forts and settlements spread steadily westward, the buffalo had fewer, smaller areas where they could live and breed in safety. What were once vast herds of buffalo are now rarities, small groups wandering over the plains. Hunted to almost extinction, their numbers are very slowly growing, but they will never approach their former glory.